The Vox bead in my ear was screaming a retreat order. Nobody was alive to follow. I was on my back in a trench, half full of freezing mud. A dead man's arm across my chest, and the thing I remember most clearly, more clearly than the noise, more clearly than the cold, is that I was counting. Not praying, counting. 1, 2, 3. The seconds between the shells. I had gotten good at it by then. Good enough to know, at 4 seconds, that the next one would land close. It did. My name is Corporal Yevan Marsh, Cadre Regiment, and I am the last of my company. I am told a confession requires me to speak the truth, even when the truth does not flatter me. So I will tell you plainly, Father, I do not know if what I did at Karvos Hold made me a survivor or a monster. I have had 3 months to decide, and I am no closer to an answer than I was the night it happened. You asked me to start at the beginning. There is no clean beginning to a siege. There is only the moment you stop believing you'll see the end of it. I will start there. Karvos Hold was not built to be defended. That was the first thing every sergeant told us, and the last thing the officers wanted to hear. It had been a grain depot once, a squat fortress warehouse on a nothing world, built centuries ago to store tithe grain against a famine that never came, and then simply left standing because tearing it down cost more than leaving it. When the Orc war band hit the system, Munitorum Logistics decided Karvos Hold's thick walls made it the obvious place to make a stand. And 30,000 of us were shipped in to prove that decision right, or die disproving it. We had 400,000 orcs coming for us across the flats. I do not say that number to impress you. I say it because it is the only number that mattered. And every soldier in that hold did the same arithmetic I did. The first night, staring at the aerial surveyor plates. However brave you were, however well you fought, the numbers did not care. My sergeant was a woman named Priya Adair, and she was the only reason any of us functioned those first weeks, instead of simply lying down in the mud and waiting. She had a way of making the impossible sound procedural. Sector 7's wall took damage. Patch it. Sector 9 ran low on last charges. Requisition more. The horde is at the gate. Hold the gate. She never made it sound like it might not work. I think now that this itself was a kind of lie, the useful kind, the kind an officer tells because the alternative is 30,000 people realizing at once how bad the odds actually are. I trusted her completely. I want you to understand that, because it matters for what comes later. We held the outer wall for 11 days. I will not walk you through every hour of it. You asked for a confession, not a campaign history. But I will tell you what those 11 days took from us, because it is the foundation everything after was built on. I told you a moment ago that Denna died reaching for a fallen comrade's weapon instead of covering her own position. I gave you the lesson it taught me and moved past the death itself too quickly. And I think, on reflection, that was its own kind of cowardice. The same instinct that makes a man summarize a thing rather than sit inside it. You asked for a confession that skips past the dead to get to the moral faster is not honest. Let me tell it properly. It was the 9th night of the siege, on the eastern stretch of the outer wall, where the parapet had been cracked open by 3 days of bombardment until it looked less like a fortification than a broken jaw. My squad held a firing position in the gap. Myself, Denna, a heavy weapons trooper named Ilya Kosk, and 2 others whose names I'm ashamed to say I have let slip from memory, though I haven't let slip the shape of what happened to them. The orcs came at us in the dark, the way they preferred by then, having learned, if a horde can be said to learn, that our night optics gave us less of an edge than daylight did. Ilya's heavy weapon jammed on the third burst, a fouled feed mechanism we had no time to clear. And for perhaps 4 seconds, our position held only the thin line of last fire the rest of us could manage, against a wall of green flesh and iron that did not seem to care how many of it we put down. Denna was to my left. I remember with a clarity I wish I did not have. The exact moment she saw one of the 2 nameless troopers go down, not killed outright, but wounded, dragged half over the parapet's broken edge, his rifle skittering away from his reaching hand into the gap between the wall and the enemy line. I do not know what she was thinking. I want to be honest about that limit, because I have spent 3 months constructing explanations for her. That she thought she could save him. That she thought the rifle mattered more than her position. That some instinct older than the Hold's cold arithmetic simply moved her hands before her training could stop them. I do not actually know. I only know what I saw. Denna Volt left the firing line, crossed 4 meters of open, contested ground under fire that had not slackened at all, and reached for a hand that was no longer reaching back. The round that took her caught her mid-stride. I want to tell you it was quick. I have told myself it was quick. On the nights I allow myself to think about it at all, though I have no honest way of knowing whether that comfort is true or simply the version of the story I have decided I can carry. Here is the part of this I have never said aloud until tonight, Father. And I ask you to hear it as the confession it actually is, not the footnote I made it sound like a moment ago. I did not go after her. Ilya cleared his weapons feed in the same 4 seconds Denna was crossing that gap, and the position held, and by the time I might have moved to help her, the moving would have meant leaving the gap undefended entirely. And some part of me, the same part I now understand, that would take the Vox-Caster from Haldenbrandt's hands 3 days later without asking my permission, had already run that arithmetic and decided the gap mattered more than Denna Volt's 4 remaining seconds of life. I do not know if that decision was correct. I have turned it over more nights than I can count, weighing the position we held against the woman we lost, and I cannot find a scale honest enough to weigh a wall against a person. I only know that the calculation happened without my consent, faster than any conscious choice, and that this frightens me more than the grief itself does. The discovery that some version of myself exists who will do this arithmetic, whether or not the rest of me agrees to it. We held the gap that night. Command commended the position the next morning, the same way they would commend the Vox-Caster Run 3 days later. And I stood in formation and accepted the commendation with a straight face, because there was no version of the truth I could have told that would have changed anything. And because I am ashamed to admit this most of all, some part of me had already begun to understand that surviving Karvos Hold was going to require becoming a man capable of accepting commendations for choices he could not fully defend to himself. I did not grieve for Denna that night. I told you earlier that grief in the hold was rationed like ammunition. I want you to understand, I mean that literally, not poetically. I scheduled it. I decided, standing in that formation, accepting a commendation for the position we'd held instead of the woman we'd lost, that I would allow myself to feel the full weight of what had happened once we were relieved. Once there was time that did not belong to the next 4 seconds of survival. I do not know if that is discipline or a kind of quiet self-betrayal. I have not decided. I am not sure there is a difference by the end of a siege like that one. The outer wall fell on the 12th day, and we withdrew to the inner keep, the old grain silos themselves, thick-walled, narrow-doored, built to keep vermin out of tithe grain, and now asked to keep out something considerably larger and considerably more determined. This is where the arithmetic stopped being abstract. Sergeant Adair gathered what remained of 3 companies, perhaps 200 souls, from an original complement closer to 2,000, into the central silo. And she told us the truth for the first time since the siege began. The relief fleet was 6 days out, if it came at all. The inner keep's ammunition reserves, rationed as tightly as she could manage, would last 4. Someone asked the obvious question. I remember it was a young trooper named Fyodor, barely past his conscription age, and I remember that his voice cracked, asking it, not from fear exactly, but from the particular exhaustion of a boy who had aged a decade in 12 days. What happens on day 5? Adair did not flinch, answering him. On day 5, we hold with bayonets, and we make every one of them cost the enemy something. We do not stop holding until there is nothing left of us to hold with. I want to tell you that this filled me with grim resolve, the kind you hear about in Munitorum recruitment reels. It did not. It filled me with a very cold, very clear kind of arithmetic of my own. The same arithmetic I'd been doing since the trench, since the shells, since Denna Volt's outstretched hand. I began, quietly, without telling anyone, to calculate what I would need to do to be one of the ones still breathing on day 5, regardless of what happened to the 200 souls around me. I am not proud of that calculation. I am telling you about it because you asked for the truth, and because it is the hinge on which everything else in this confession turns. I have not told you about Ilya Kosk yet, beyond his jammed weapon on the night Denna died, and I think I have been avoiding it, because his story is the one that frightens me most when I turn it over. More than Denna, more than Halden, more even than my own arithmetic. Denna's death and Halden's mutilation were things that happened to people around me, while some cold part of me made choices I am still accounting for. What happened to Ilya was different. It was not a single half-second decision. It was a man coming apart slowly, in full view of the rest of us, over the better part of 2 days, and none of us, myself included, doing anything to stop it. Because stopping it would have meant taking our eyes off the horde long enough to lose the wall entirely. Ilya had been solid for 11 days. He was the kind of trooper other troopers organized themselves around without meaning to. Steady hands on the heavy weapon, a flat, unbothered voice on the Vox, even when the news was bad. The sort of man whose calm made the rest of us believe, wrongly or not, that the position could hold as long as he was in it. I want you to understand that when I tell you what happened to him, I am not describing a weak man. I am describing what 11 days and a night watching Denna Volt die at 4 meters distance can do to anyone, steady or not. It started on the first day inside the inner keep, the day Adair gave us the true numbers, 4 days of ammunition, 6 days until relief, if relief came at all. I watched something behind Ilya's eyes simply stop. The way a Vox unit stops when its power cell finally runs dry. Not a dramatic failure, just a small light going dark that had been on so long you'd forgotten it could go dark at all. He kept working. He cleaned his weapon, took his watch rotations, answered when spoken to. But he had stopped, in some essential way, being present for any of it. And by the second day, The rest of the squad had started quietly covering positions he no longer fully occupied. The way you'd compensate for a limb that had gone numb without telling the rest of the body. On the morning of the third day, the same morning Holden, Brandt, and I would make the Vox-Caster Run that afternoon, Ilya simply sat down in the corridor outside the central silo, in full view of anyone passing, and would not get up. I was the one who found him first. I want to tell you I handled it with compassion, the way Sergeant Adair would have, the way the man I want to believe I am would have. I did not. I remember crouching in front of him, and I remember the particular fear that rose in me. Not fear for Ilya, Father. I want to be honest about that too. But fear that someone from command would find him like this before I could get him moving again, and that his failure would become, in some way, I could not have articulated cleanly at the time, a mark against the squad's readiness, against my own account of what I was owed for surviving this far. Get up, I told him. Not gently. I have thought about the tone I used more times than I can count since, and I still cannot fully explain it, except to say that some part of me had already begun treating other people's suffering as an inconvenience to my own continued survival. And Ilya, sitting in that corridor, refusing to move, was exactly that kind of inconvenience. He looked at me. I remember his eyes very clearly, more clearly than I remember Denna's death, which strikes me as strange even now. And he said, in the same flat, unbothered voice he'd used to report ammunition counts 11 days running, I don't think I'm going to make it to day 5, Yevan. I've decided I'd rather not spend what's left of it pretending I will. I did not know what to say to that. I still do not 3 months later, sitting in this room with you. I told him something about duty, something about the squad needing him, words that felt hollow coming out of my mouth even as I said them. Because some part of me understood, even in the moment, that I was not actually speaking to comfort him. I was speaking to get him upright and functional again before anyone senior noticed. Because a squad member found sitting in a corridor refusing orders was a problem that could attach itself to me if I did not solve it quickly enough. He got up eventually, not because of anything I said, I think, but because some deeper habit of discipline reasserted itself. The 11 days of training beneath the 11 days of horror. He returned to his position. He fought competently on the 5th day, the day the ammunition ran out and we went to bayonets. And as far as I know, Father, he is alive still, recovering in a Munitorum Medici facility 3 systems away. And I have not written to him, though I have started the letter 4 times. I have not written to him because I do not know how to ask the question I actually want to ask, which is this: did I fail him that morning in the corridor? Or did I do the only thing that could actually be done? Get him back on his feet through whatever means were available? Dignity be damned. Because a broken man standing at his post was worth more to the 8 souls depending on that position than a broken man being gently, properly, humanely allowed to fall apart. I do not have an answer, Father. I am beginning to suspect that this entire confession is a catalogue of moments where I do not have an answer, and that this, not the deaths, not the survival, not the commendations I cannot look at without shame, is the actual wound Karvos Hold left in me. Not grief, not guilt exactly, though there is plenty of that too. Something closer to a permanent uncertainty about which version of myself was actually in command during the moments that mattered. whether that version was ever fully a man I would recognize, before the hold got its hands on him. On the third day inside the inner keep, a supply runner named Corporal Holden Brandt was assigned to carry the last working Vox-Caster unit from the eastern silo to the command post. A run of perhaps 400 meters across ground. The orks had zeroed in with mortar fire the previous evening. I was assigned to accompany him. 2 men, 1 vital piece of equipment, a run everyone knew was likely to kill at least one of us before it was finished. Holden was not a friend of mine. I want to be precise here, Father, because precision is the only mercy I have left to offer you in this account. We were not close, but we had served the same 11 days, eaten the same rations, buried men from the same squads. He was, in the narrow way the hold allowed anyone to be anything to each other. Someone I trusted to run beside me and not get me killed through carelessness. The mortars found us at the 200-meter mark. I do not remember deciding what happened next. I have tried, in the months since, to reconstruct some moment of choice, some instant where I weighed his life against mine and made a decision I could stand behind. There was no such instant. There was only the sound of the incoming round and my body moving toward the nearest cover, and Holden's body a half-second slower, still holding the Vox-Caster he'd been ordered not to drop under any circumstances. The round landed close enough that I felt the heat of it through my coat. When the dust cleared, Holden was on the ground, and the Vox-Caster was in my hands. Because some part of me, I do not know which part, and I have stopped pretending I ever will, had reached out and taken it from him before I understood what I was doing. He was alive. I want to say that clearly, because it matters. Holden Brandt did not die on that run. His legs were ruined below the knee, and he did not walk again, not while I knew him. But he lived. What haunts me is not that he was hurt. Mortars hurt people. That is simply the arithmetic of a siege. What haunts me is that in the half-second before I understood what my hands were doing, some cold, calculating part of me had already decided that the Vox-Caster reaching command mattered more than whether Holden Brandt's legs reached command attached to the rest of him. And that this same part of me had, without my permission, without my knowledge, made certain the equipment survived first and worried about the man second. I delivered the Vox-Caster. I went back for Holden myself, under fire, and I dragged him the remaining distance. And by every measure anyone else would judge me on, I was a hero that day. Adair commended me in front of the survivors. I have the citation still, folded in my kit, and I have never been able to look at it without remembering the half-second that citation does not mention. The half-second where I chose the equipment first, and only afterward, only once the choosing was already done, remembered that Holden was a man and not simply an obstacle between myself and command. I am not confessing to cowardice, Father. I went back for him. I am confessing to something I do not have a clean word for. A moment where the machinery the hold had built inside me, the cold arithmetic of survival, moved faster than whatever part of me still wanted to be a good man. And I did not find out which one I actually was till after the choosing was already finished. The relief fleet did not come on the 4th day, as Adair had feared. It did not come on the 5th either. The day she had told us plainly would be our last, if it did not. I will tell you about the 5th day as simply as I can, because there is no way to dress it in anything but what it was. By dawn, the ammunition was gone. Adair had told the truth about that at least. She had rationed it to the hour, and the hour ran out exactly when she said it would. What remained of the 200 souls in the inner keep, perhaps 60 of us by then, fixed bayonets, because there was nothing else left to fix, and we waited for the horde to finish what 11 days of siege had started. I will not describe the fighting in detail. You do not need it for this confession, and I do not have the words for it that would not simply be an attempt to make you feel what I felt, which is a kind of manipulation I am trying, in this room, to stop practicing. I will tell you only this. It was not glorious. It was not the kind of fighting the recruitment reels show you. It was exhausted men and women, some of them barely more than children, doing violence to other exhausted creatures in a collapsing building and calling it duty because the alternative, admitting it was simply slaughter with extra steps, was more than anyone's remaining strength could bear. Sergeant Adair died on the 5th day. I saw it happen. She had promised us, 11 days earlier, that she would make the impossible sound procedural. And in the end, her death was the least procedural thing I have ever witnessed. Sudden, ugly, entirely without the dignity the citations later tried to give it. I did not die on the 5th day. I want to tell you it was skill or courage or the favor of the Emperor himself that spared me. I have turned the question over every night since, and the honest answer is smaller and less flattering than any of those. I was simply in a different part of the collapsing keep when the worst of it happened. And the same cold, calculating part of me that took the Vox-Caster from Halden's hands had, without asking my permission, spent 5 days quietly positioning me in the places most likely to leave me breathing. The relief fleet arrived on the 6th day, 6 hours too late for Sergeant Adair and 41 others. 6 hours too early, some nights, for my own liking. Because 6 hours earlier, I might have died alongside people I respected, instead of surviving through a calculation I am still not certain I chose to make. You have asked me, Father, what I want absolution for. I have thought about this for 3 months, and I will tell you honestly, I do not think I am asking for absolution. I think I am asking you to tell me which man I actually am. The one who went back for Haldenbrand under fire, or the one whose hands moved for the equipment first without waiting for permission from whatever is left of my conscience. I do not think you can answer that. I think perhaps no one can. And that this is the actual cost of Karvos Hold, not the 60 of us who survived it, not the ammunition or the walls or the 11 days, but the fact that every one of us who lived now carries a version of the question I am asking you tonight, and none of us will ever get a clean answer. I was given a commendation for Karvos Hold. I was offered a promotion, which I have not yet accepted, because I do not know how to lead other soldiers into the same arithmetic that built whatever I am now, without warning them first what it costs. And I do not know how to warn them without the warning itself becoming a kind of poison, teaching them to calculate before they've even fired their first shot. Here is what I actually believe, Father, on the nights when I can bear to believe anything at all. The Hold did not make me a monster. It also did not leave me a hero. It left me something in between, something the citations and the recruitment reels have no honest word for. A man who will do what needs doing to survive, and who will spend the rest of his life uncertain whether what needs doing and what is right were ever actually the same thing on the 5th day. or whether he simply told himself they were because the alternative was more than he could carry. I think of Ilya Kosk often, more than I think of Denna or Holden. And I have come to believe it is because his story does not resolve into either heroism or tragedy the way theirs do. Denna's death has the shape of a sacrifice, however uselessly it ended. Halden's injury has the shape of a cost paid for a mission completed. But Ilya simply broke and was made to unbreak by methods none of us would call kind, and lived, and I do not know what shape that story has at all, except that it is the shape of every soldier I have met since who survived a siege long enough to stop believing in the version of themselves they carried into it. I think, some nights, that this is the actual purpose a confession serves, not absolution, which I no longer believe I am owed or even asking for, but witness. I wanted someone to have heard the arithmetic said plainly, once, without the varnish the citations put on it. I wanted someone besides myself to know that Corporal Yevan Marsh, commended twice for actions at Karvos Hold, does not fully trust the man those commendations describe, and has not found a way to reconcile him with the man standing in front of you now. I do not know if the Emperor forgives that. I do not know if I am asking him to. I think, perhaps, I am only asking someone, anyone, to have heard it said honestly once, by a man willing to admit he does not know the answer. That is my confession, Father. I do not know what you can offer me for it. I am not certain, some nights, that there is anything to offer. I only know that I have said it now, plainly to another living person, and that this is the first time since Karvos Hold that the saying itself has felt like it weighed less than the carrying did, which may be the only mercy this account was ever going to give me, and which I have decided, for tonight at least, to accept as enough. I do not know what I expected walking out of that chamber. Some part of me, the same part that had spent 3 months rehearsing this confession in the dark, turning each sentence over until it wore smooth, had half believed that saying it aloud would change something concrete, that I would step back into the corridor a different weight than I had carried in. I did not feel different. I want to be honest about that too, since honesty is the only discipline I have left that I trust completely. I felt exactly as heavy as I had an hour before, the arithmetic still running quietly beneath everything, the way it has run beneath everything since the first night in that trench, counting seconds between shells. Perhaps that is simply what a confession is for a man like me. Not a transformation, but a witnessing, as I said. The weight does not lift. Someone else simply knows its shape now, and I am no longer the only one who has to hold it in silence. The promotion papers are still on the desk in my billet, unsigned. I picked them up twice on my way back from the chapel, and twice I set them down again, because I still do not know how to answer the question they are actually asking me underneath the rank and the pay grade. Whether I am willing to become, for other soldiers, what Sergeant Adair was for me. A voice that makes the impossible sound procedural, knowing full well it is a kind of lie. The useful kind, the kind that gets people through 11 days they would not survive believing the truth. I think I will sign them eventually. Not because I have resolved anything you and I discussed tonight, Father, but because I have come to suspect that resolution was never actually on offer. Not for Karvos Hold, not for Denna, not for Ilya, not for whatever version of myself took that Vox-Caster from Halden's hands before I understood I had moved at all. Some soldiers, I think, get to come home from a siege and put it behind them. I do not believe I am one of them, and I've stopped expecting to become one through the simple passage of time. What I have decided, walking back through the cold to my billet tonight, is smaller than absolution and I think more honest than it. If I take that promotion, I will not lie to the soldiers under my command the way Adair, however kindly, lied to me. I will tell them, as plainly as I have told you, that the arithmetic exists, that it will run whether they consent to it or not, and that surviving it does not make them heroes any more than it made me one. I do not know if that is a kindness or simply a different kind of burden to hand a frightened recruit on their first night in a fortress that was never built to hold. I have run out of certainty about most things since Karvos Hold, Father. That at least, I no longer pretend otherwise. I thank you for hearing this. I do not ask you to tell me it was the right thing to say. I only asked to say it once, to someone who would not look away, and you did not look away, and for tonight. That is the entire shape of what I came here for.